The Morgenthau Plan was a 1944 proposal by US Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau Jr. to strip Germany of its ability to wage war by dismantling its heavy industry and transforming it into an agricultural society. It called for the destruction of factories in the Ruhr, partitioning Germany into North and South, capping production to prevent rearmament, and creating an international zone where manufacturing would be banned. German assets abroad were to be confiscated and forced labor was envisioned as part of the plan. Supporters saw it as pragmatic peace. Critics viewed it as vengeful overreach. Roosevelt and Eisenhower backed it, but Churchill and General Patton opposed it, fearing that this would push Germany towards Soviet influence. President Herbert Hoover later reported the plan would starve up to 25 million Germans. Historians argue its implementation could have undermined Allied legitimacy and even fueled a revival of extremism in Germany. The idea of breaking up Germany wasn't new, as it was previously proposed in Theodor Kaufmann's 1941 book Germany Must Perish and Dutch annexation proposals. When the plan leaked in September 1944, Nazi propaganda seized on it, portraying it as a Jewish plot for German enslavement and using it to rally resistance in the war's final stage. Although parts of it shaped early occupation policies, loopholes allowed reconstruction. By 1947, the plan was dropped in favor of rebuilding a stable economy through the Marshall Plan. The Kalergi Plan is a theory that claims Austrian-Japanese politician Richard von Coudenhove-Kalergi, founder of the Pan-European Union, devised a scheme to replace white Europeans through immigration and racial mixing. Supporters point to passages from his 1925 book Practical Idealism, where he predicted that future humanity will be of mixed heritage, replaced by a race that resembles the ancient Egyptians, and that today's races and classes will disappear. These words have been interpreted as proof of a deliberate plan to erase white Europeans. Critics of this theory say that Kalergi's writing was a philosophical forecast, not a political program. They stress that he wrote will, not should, and that his 1923 manifesto Pan-Europa promotes a united and independent Europe, safe from Soviet expansion and communism. Despite this, the theory spread across Europe and North America, tying modern European migration issues in countries like the UK or Germany to the idea of a coordinated plot. Historians dismiss the Kalergi Plan as a racist theory that distorts his writings and misrepresents his vision of European unity. The Georgia Guidestones were a granite monument built in 1980 in Elberton, Georgia, often called the American Stonehenge, commissioned by a man under the pseudonym R.C. Christian. They stood until being destroyed by a bomb in 2022, and the debris was removed by the government the same day. The monument featured 10 inscriptions in 8 languages, intended as a guide for humanity in the aftermath of a nuclear or social catastrophe, which the sponsors believed was looming. The messages promoted themes of a world government, population control, environmental stewardship, and spirituality. Among the most controversial were calls to maintain humanity under 500 million, steer reproduction to improve diversity, create a new universal language, and balance personal rights with social duties. They also urged fair laws, world courts, and living in harmony with nature. Critics accused the inscriptions of promoting eugenics, totalitarianism, and genocide. Some conservative Christians denounced it as satanic, labeling the stones the 10 Commandments of the Antichrist, and speculated that the anonymous sponsor belonged to a Luciferian secret society tied to the New World Order. At its unveiling, a local minister condemned the monument as linked to sun and devil worship. Operation Northwoods was a 1962 proposal by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to stage attacks on American military and civilian targets and blame them on Cuba in order to justify an invasion. The plan included shelling US bases, staging hijackings of civilian planes and boats, sinking refugee vessels, faking the deaths of Cuban refugees, blowing up a US ship at Guantanamo Bay, and carrying out bombings on American soil. The idea was to create public public outrage and portray Cuba as a reckless threat. The plan emerged after Fidel Castro's 1959 revolution ousted a US-backed regime, nationalized industries, and allied Cuba with the Soviet Union. The US had already attempted to remove him through Operation Zapata, which trained Cuban exiles for the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in April 1961. That defeat, in which most of the invaders were killed or captured, made military leaders more determined to remove Castro. They presented Operation Northwoods for President Kennedy's approval, but he rejected it, triggering tensions with military leaders who wanted a harsher stance on Cuba. The rift grew during the Cuban Missile Crisis when the Joint Chiefs urged nuclear strikes and an invasion, but Kennedy refused again. Though never implemented, Operation Northwoods revealed that top US military officials were willing to consider deceiving and endangering American citizens to achieve geopolitical goals. COINTELPRO, short for Counterintelligence Program, was a covert FBI initiative launched in 1956 under Director J. Edgar Hoover. Justified by fears of communism during the Red Scare, it expanded into a sweeping campaign of surveillance, disruption, and harassment against political groups and individuals across the United States. The FBI targeted civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, feminist organizations, environmentalists, Native American and Chicano movements, Puerto Rican independence groups, and even the Ku Klux Klan. The program used illegal wiretaps, infiltration, forged documents, blackmail, violence, and psychological warfare. Among its most infamous operations was the campaign against Martin Luther King Jr., which included bugging his phones and hotel rooms, sending him an anonymous letter urging him to take his life, and attempting to discredit him publicly. Malcolm X, spokesman for the Nation of Islam, was also targeted. COINTELPRO escalated against the Black Panther Party, coordinating with local police on warrantless raids that led to multiple deaths. The FBI also protected informants inside groups like the KKK, while pursuing brutal crackdowns on leftist organizations. Even individuals like Muhammad Ali were monitored or harassed. The program remained secret until 1971, when the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI broke into a Pennsylvania office and leaked documents to the press. The exposure caused national outrage and forced Hoover to announce the end of COINTELPRO. However, only a fraction of files were obtained, and many later releases were heavily redacted, leaving the full extent unknown. Generalplan Ost was Nazi Germany's blueprint for the conquest and colonization of Eastern Europe, rooted in Hitler's doctrine of Lebensraum. It envisioned the extermination, expulsion, and enslavement of tens of millions of Slavs, Communists, Jews, and Roma, to clear space for German settlers, extending the Reich's reach as far as the Ural Mountains. Those deemed racially suitable, such as Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians, were marked for eventual assimilation, while the rest of the population was to be deported into Siberia. Although never fully realized due to Germany's military defeats, elements of the plan were carried out in Nazi-occupied territories. Mass shootings, deliberate starvation, forced labor, and extermination through disease claimed millions of lives, many more enslaved. The plan was part of the broader European New Order, aimed at establishing a Greater Germanic Reich in the east. After the German defeat at Stalingrad, resources shifted to the war effort and colonization was abandoned. Plan Dalet was a Zionist military plan drawn up by the paramilitary Haganah in March 1948 during the final months of the British Mandate, intended to conquer territory for the soon-to-be-declared State of Israel. Requested by David Ben-Gurion, it served as the framework for Israel's military operations until the end of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War and is closely tied to the mass displacement of Palestinians known as the Nakba. The plan called for sieges on Arab villages, the bombing of urban neighborhoods, forced expulsions, and the systematic burning of homes and fields to prevent displaced residents from returning. Detailed lists of targeted villages and neighborhoods were prepared, and operations escalated with massacres such as Deir Yassin. Commanders like Yigal Allon urged greater aggression even in areas with little resistance, while Ben-Gurion endorsed preemptive strikes, aiming to cripple Palestinian economy and secure territorial dominion. Supporters argue that Plan Dalet was defensive, designed to hold the borders allocated by the UN partition plan and guard against invading Arab armies. Critics say it was a blueprint for ethnic cleansing, systematically expelling Palestinians while the British still held responsibility for security. The New World Order theory claims that a hidden network of elites controls global politics, industry, and media to establish a single world government. It's tied to groups ranging from the Illuminati, Freemasons, Bilderberg Group, Le Cercle, Club of Rome, to institutions like the UN, EU, Trilateral Commission, and World Economic Forum. According to the theory, the plan involves dismantling national sovereignty, open borders, creating a world army and court, and replacing cash with a microchip-based system, all run by unelected leaders. Supporters of the theory argue that the agenda is advanced through eliminating threats to the agenda, placing supporters of it into positions of power, and staging crises, wars, economic crashes, pandemics, to make the public demand stronger global governance. Predictive programming is set to prepare people by embedding the idea of a world dictatorship into films, books, and media until it feels natural. The model is imagined as a pyramid, with only those at the top aware of the real goals. Regional blocs such as the EU, a proposed American Union, and an Asian Union are seen as stepping stones toward eventual unification under a communist-based UN system. The Great Reset is a plan for reshaping the global economy put forward by the World Economic Forum under Klaus Schwab in 2020. It is framed around three main components: steering markets toward fairer outcomes through things like wealth taxes, green energy, and regulations; secondly, using large-scale government spending to build a more sustainable system instead of restoring the old one; and lastly, using technology for the public good, though the details of this remain vague and raise concerns about surveillance and control. The plan ties into broader ideas of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, emphasizing technologies such as AI, big data, and blockchain, alongside restructuring jobs, skills, and social contracts. Proponents frame it as a chance to address climate change, inequality, and economic fragility, but critics argue it risks becoming a top-down system of elite control, centralizing power through mechanisms like central bank digital currencies. The WEF's widely circulated line, "By 2030 you will own nothing and be happy," has fueled suspicions that it wants to abolish private and personal property and enforce air quotes equality by undermining personal freedom. The Great Reset became closely associated with the aftermath of the 2020 pandemic, which critics saw as a pretext for restructuring economies and consolidating elite influence. The Hooton Plan was a 1943 proposal by American anthropologist Ernest Hooton, published in his article "Breed War Strain Out of Germans." It outlined steps to dismantle German nationalism and militarism, while preserving what he saw as positive German traits. His plan suggested executing or imprisoning National Socialist leaders, permanently exiling professional army officers, and using the remaining soldiers as supervised labor units in devastated Allied countries for at least 20 years. These men would be allowed to marry only local women, aiming to reduce the pure German birth rate and dilute nationalist ideology through intermarriage. Hooton also recommended breaking Germany into smaller states under Allied supervision, encouraging intermarriage between German women and Allied soldiers, and promoting the immigration of non-Germans, particularly men, into German territories. The stated goal was to weaken German unity and dissolve national identity. The plan has since been criticized as advocating forced assimilation and even genocide through demographic engineering. However, it was never adopted as official Allied policy and remained only an academic proposal. The Great Replacement is a theory popularized by French writer Renaud Camus, who argued that white Europeans, particularly the ethnic French, are being demographically and culturally replaced by non-white populations, especially from Muslim-majority countries. He claimed this process was enabled or encouraged by replacist elites through mass immigration, higher birth rates among immigrants, and declining birth rates among white Europeans. The idea quickly spread to the United States, Australia, and New Zealand, often overlapping with the white genocide conspiracy theory, which alleges that powerful figures are deliberately trying to diminish or eliminate white populations. Camus presented this concept in his 2011 book Le Grand Remplacement, framing Muslim immigration as a direct threat to French culture and portraying demographic changes as the result of deliberate policies by the EU or the UN, what he described as genocide by substitution. While mainstream scholars reject the theory as racist, unscientific, and based on misinterpretations of demographic trends, proponents argue that rising immigration to predominantly white countries shows the process in action. The theory has inspired several terrorist attacks, including the 2018 Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, the 2019 Christchurch mosque shootings, the 2019 El Paso Walmart attack, and the 2023 Jacksonville shooting, all of which referenced Great Replacement ideas. Agenda 21 was a non-binding action plan adopted by 178 governments at the 1992 UN Earth Summit, designed to promote sustainable development at the global, national, and local levels. It emphasized cooperation between governments, the UN, and social groups to address human impacts on the environment. While officially framed as a roadmap for sustainability, the plan quickly became the subject of suspicion. Critics argued that it was less about recycling or renewable energy and more about pushing populations into dense urban centers, while clearing rural areas, effectively restructuring how people lived. In the US, activists, particularly within the Tea Party and militia movements, claimed it was a UN plot to seize property, strip citizens of rights, and impose a one-world government. Media figures like Glenn Beck amplified these fears, describing Agenda 21 as eco-totalitarianism disguised as environmentalism. Critics warn it aims to relocate people from rural areas to smart cities, restrict land and water use, manipulate transportation, raise fuel costs, and establish surveillance-based control. The Project for the New American Century was a neoconservative think tank founded in Washington, D.C. in 1997 with the goal of promoting American global leadership. Its founders argued that US dominance was good for both America and the world, calling for a strong military and moral mission in foreign policy. 10 of the 25 original signatories went on to hold key positions in George W. Bush's administration, including Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and Paul Wolfowitz. Some members had also supported aggressive policies toward the Middle East. In the year 2000, PNAC published a paper, Rebuilding America's Defenses, which called for a massive military buildup, the ability to fight multiple wars at once, and the pursuit of global dominance. It stressed securing strategic regions and resources, and warned against allowing rival powers. Critics argue this blueprint closely foreshadowed the Bush administration's decision to invade Iraq. PNAC formally ceased operations in 2006 and was replaced by the Foreign Policy Initiative, which lasted until 2017.